Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to the Data Idols, first ever Data Idols Lightning Talks. I'm really looking forward to today. We've pulled together a fantastic panel focused obviously on diversity and inclusion in the recruitment world. Spent many years running events, actually running tech events, but strangely, after 15 years running Data Idols, this is the first time I've run a more recruitment, HR, people-focused event. And weirdly, I'm a little bit more nervous for it. I was saying to everyone in the office this morning, run events about quantum computing or causal inference, but joining an event with all my peers from the industry has made me feel a little bit more nervous, but really, really looking forward to it. Just in terms of why are we doing this after 15 years? Why are we running our first event? And what we've realized is we're really good at building community. We're really good at building events. And actually, it's nice to run events focused on the industry that we work in day to day. And we have a bit of a plan for the year ahead. And our aim is to put on an event like this, potentially every month, to share real world knowledge of what it's like working in recruitment, what it's like working within talent, HR, and that sort of space. And in terms of that, we're building a bit of a roadmap. We have an event plan next month, which is focused on becoming a manager for the first time. We're working with another partner from PwC to talk about a blueprint to rapidly scale teams. We have slightly more rogue ideas about how to fire someone. It's not nice, but I'm sure we've all had to do it at some point. But yeah, no, different events that fit the industry that we work in. Just one super quick thing that we're also working on is open sourcing some trends from within the industry. We quite regularly get asks for information about salary trends, technology trends, different patterns, all that sort of stuff. And we have a bit of an idea to open source that. And what that looks like is we're going to build a panel of people from within the industry. Once a month, we're going to send out a short questionnaire, probably take about 3 minutes to fill it in. And we've paired up with the data and analytics team at Places for People, and they're going to help us correlate it all. We're going to build interesting insights, graphs, all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to distribute it totally for free to everyone that's on the panel. So we'll drop some links to that in the chat. And if it's of interest, it'd be great to have everyone involved. But in terms of today, as I mentioned at the start, we've pulled together an absolutely amazing panel, and it's my great pleasure to ask everyone, please do turn on your cameras, turn on your microphones, and I'd like to welcome you to the virtual stage. As you can see, we're joined by Annie, Christine, Jay, and Kirsten. And the rough idea for today is, it's an interactive session. We've pre-prepared, we've put our heads together, we've pre-prepared some questions, some talking points, which hopefully everyone will find interesting. But as I say, it's definitely interactive. There's a Q&A feature within the platform. If you have any questions, stick them in there. It'd be great to talk about them. The chat feature is also open if you'd like to say hello. But as I say, Q&A if you have a question. So to start things off, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this big old slide. Bear with, and then we're going to get some introductions going. So to kick things off, it'd be lovely to learn a bit more about each of you. So I'll come to each of you in turn. We'll have a bit of an introduction, and then we'll get going from there. So I'll come to you first, Annie, if that's okay. Can you tell us a bit more about you and a bit more about your background, please?
Yeah, of course, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Jackson, and I head up the TA team at Clio. Most people in the UK probably wouldn't have heard of Clio. We're actually a fintech scale-up, mostly targeted towards users in the US, helping Gen Z and millennials with their financial well-being. Very focused on using AI to help that and really help our users to kind of encourage them to spend their money better, build good credit, and save what they can using AI. I've had about recruitment experience, mostly focused more on product and design hiring, but now leading a team of tech recruiters and product and non-tech recruiters as well. But that's me.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Annie. We've all heard of Clio. Come on, we've all heard of Clio. We could all probably benefit from using Clio. I know I definitely could. So thank you very much, Annie. Christine, can we have a bit more about you, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Ong. So I'm currently the head of talent and people at Quantum Motion. So we are a quantum computing hardware startup, very, very niche. So actually, in terms of diversity and inclusion, when I joined, we started with a blank slate. So a lot of what I'll be sharing today will actually be from my last company where I was at, which is the Financial Times, where I was leading the product and technology hiring and recruitment there. So yeah, looking forward to sharing more insights and learning from the panel today.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Christine. Jay, it'd be lovely to learn more about you, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Jay Clarke-Binns and I'm from Google DeepMind. And for those who don't know Google DeepMind, we are a foundational AI research lab. So we're based in London and we work on basically the frontier models. You may have seen some of our models such as things like Lyria and Gemini. And as a part of our role, as part of my role as a diversity, equity and inclusion partner, I'm focusing on like how to build out small scale experiments to think about what works and what will stick within the organization. And somewhat maybe similar to Christine's industry, like AI development and foundational research is very niche and very academic. So diversity challenges are very different to this industry.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Jay. I watched a super cool documentary about AlphaGo a few years back, and since then I've been hooked on DeepMind. So yeah, great to have you with us. Thanks very much. Kirsten, you've got a cough. I'm trying to time it for when you're not coughing.
You timed it beautifully.
Okay.
I thought I was going to be up next right mid cough, but you managed.
We've got you. We're professionals. We're professionals. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about you, please, Kirsten?
Yeah. So hi everybody. So I currently am at Monzo. For those of you who don't know who Monzo Bank is, it's a big old bank now, 9 million customers, but it's about 9 years old. So it's gone from startup to scale up to grown up, I suppose. My role as Director of Diversity and Inclusion there means that I work with lots of different parts of the business, whether it's our legal teams, our tech teams, our recruitment teams, to see where we can find all the opportunities to kind of embed D&I into what we do. I think what's interesting about Monzo or any fintech is that you have interesting challenges around diversity in terms of the tech industry and in terms of financial services. So there's, you really need to lean in to D&I, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you all today. I just wanted to touch on, I guess, based on what I've said, the importance of thinking about D&I, particularly in the companies that we work for. Like if I use Monzo as an example, the success of Monzo is down to how our product looks and feels for our customers. That's what brings all of our customers on board. And then the service that is offered off the back of that. So if you have a very homogenous company, then you're not really necessarily going to understand all the wants and needs and challenges and barriers of your customer base. So it's imperative from a innovation, creativity, aligning with your customer needs points of view. But also I think as well from a social responsibility point of view as well. There's lots of legal and ethical imperatives around why it's important to do diversity and inclusion. But I think we all feel that if we feel included and we belong, then we're probably going to be more engaged, we're going to be more productive, we're going to be more innovative. And then I have the pleasure of onboarding everybody that comes into Monzo and tell them about diversity and inclusion. And when it comes to talent attraction and recruitment, almost everybody have said to me, D&I has had a little bit of an influence in why I've chosen to work for this company. Either it's the benefits, or it's the culture, or it's just simply the presence and the discussion you're having about diversity and inclusion makes me want to work for someone that is going to think about our customers in that way.
Amazing. Very, very well put. I think from that perspective, it's quite clear, it's the right thing to do. It's a legal requirement, but there's so many benefits as well. Like, why would we not be having this conversation just for the benefits alone? So yeah, great way to kick things off, Kirsten. Thank you very much. As mentioned, the chat is open. If you know any of these panelists, if you want to say hello, if you want to let them know that smiley faces are watching along at home, if anyone's mum has joined, then jump in the chat, say hello. We'll give you a little shout out as we get going. I think the first thing I was keen to talk about, Kirsten's set the tone. We're in the right direction already. We've got a webinar, we've got an event. This is good. I think I was keen to come to perhaps you first on this next area, Christine, and then we'll open it up. We'll go from there. But I think one thing I was keen to talk about first, actually, to continue setting that tone, is the intersectionality of diversity, and actually understanding the complexities of identity. Because I think for me, I put myself in that same boat. I could be perhaps even a little bit blinkered. It's men and women. And, I talk to companies and they have this objective of getting more women in tech and stuff like that. But there's much more to it than that. So, yeah, if you could please expand on that, Christine, we'll get going from there.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a bit of context. So when I joined the FT in 2018, our chief product and information officer, who's actually since gone to Google, she was really keen on ensuring we've got a 50-50 gender parity organization by 2020. So, there's something here about metrics that we can talk about as well. But, at the time, and that's why I joined, I was like, okay, if this is coming from the board and it's, not just mandated at leadership level, but actually, also hiring a head of D&I and ensuring all the departments are all across it. Because I think the one thing that we see in larger companies is they might just hire a head of D&I and call it a day, and that's it. And the efforts aren't just on one person; it's across the entire company. You have to get buy-in from leadership and everyone, like top and bottom and everywhere in between. So I think when we set about our journey, I think the first year, we were invested in everything from, hosting conferences like with women in tech conferences, ensuring we've got speakers in all the right places. And of course, everything changed in 2020, right? After the George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matter, we then realized I can say this now, at the time we actually didn't have any diversity in our journalism floor. So we were actually quite late to report on it. And that was when across the whole company, we're like, oh my God, what are we doing? So it wasn't just on, hiring more female at the time, but actually looking at ethnicity data as well. And then on top of that, looking at our ERG, so employee resource groups, once you start activating one particular community, you then get questions from the others as well. Well, what are you doing for us? So yeah, I think it was quite interesting, I think, learning about that over time. So, whereas what we're talking a lot about is more about the visible diversity traits, such as gender and race. As the journey went on, we look at things like, gender identity, orientation, neurodiversity comes up a lot as well, and our product and technology space. So we really got to figure out, what was the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So at the FT, we are a 130-year-old newspaper. People who read our papers are bankers and white and male. And if we are going to be reaching out, I think, as Kirsten mentioned earlier, we want to diversify our readership, and we want to be able to ensure our own people are rightly represented. How do we target those particular markets? So there's so many different intersectionalities there to target. And I think as a team, we had to be really humble, and be curious, because the reality is I didn't know everything. I was learning a lot as we were going. So really listening to the teams, understanding, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and then setting some metrics, which is what we did at the time, to then, set about our journey.
Amazing. Really, really well put, actually, Christine. I think in terms of that, it quite quickly becomes clear that it isn't one size, fits all. That there is a whole complexity of identity, and each complexity requires slightly different strategies. So I guess keeping it going along that talking point. Does anyone else want to jump in, at this point and talk a bit more about what it's like where you are and what you've experienced? I can see you nodding, Jay. Appreciate the visual cue. I like this. If not, I'll just pick on people. So
yeah, and
if you're happy, nod. But we'll come to you, Jay.
And I never use Zoom, so I'm like, is there a hand raise function? I have no idea what's going on here. I work in Google, so it's obviously Google Meets here. But yeah, no, the one thing I also wanted to add to this is, I think when you think about intersectionality, something that I think to grapple with leaders is that it's not simply just like checking off identities, but it's about understanding how some identities are oppressed, and how, like, when they're oppressed, when they meet another oppressed identity, it forms these new forms of oppression. So like you may have like racialized sexism, for example, which someone else may not have if they just have one aspect. So it's just that. But the thing that I try to think about when thinking about intersectionality is thinking about it from kind of like the disability model of like the idea of dropped curbs. So like dropped curbs on pavements help everyone. Like there's no one who doesn't help them. You've got luggage that helps. You've got a pram. You've got like a temporary mobility issue, permanent. Like it helps everybody. And so I try to think about, as you approach these challenges that can be quite complex, think about where are the drop curbs in your organization where actually you can actually get behind something that's going to maybe make a big sea change across the organization for everyone. And then you might want to also think about the targeted interventions for certain communities. 100%, you should definitely be focusing on that. But it's really thinking like, what is the thing maybe behind the symptoms that you're experiencing in your org, which I see a lot is like, so an example might be, I'm just going to stick with women in tech, maybe there may be leadership challenges for women in tech. And sometimes when you dig into it, you're like, what's driving this? Obviously, there's pipeline challenges, but sometimes there's also a lack of organizational recognition for women comparative to other peers, which means that it hinders their career mobility in the organization. But everybody wants to be recognized for their career adequately and equitably. So then thinking about like initiatives like that can actually help everyone. So that I try to think of it in this quite holistic but like nuanced way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And I think from that perspective, then, how would you approach that in that instance, Jay? You know, you're looking at specific examples across your org. It's sometimes difficult to know where to start, and I think we'll get into this as we go through the webinar with some very specifics and things we can all do and actions for people to take away from being on the webinar. But you've talked there about actually some specific challenges with underrepresented groups, and is there approaches that you take or effective measures that you would put in place if you identify a specific challenge? Is there an approach when you notice something? Is there a way of working that you then look to dig into it?
I think something that we're probably going to all say at some point is data. Like understanding the data, like most organizations will have ERGs, they're going to have some kind of like leadership forums, they have manager meetings, there are a whole host of organizational meetings and touch points across the business. And it's really trying to understand like, what are the business goals? Where are they trying to get to, and how might there be cultural challenges that may be actually acting like kind of like headwinds that don't actually propel them to go forward? And I think it's like really digging into that data to find out where the crux of the problem really is, and then exploring that. And like I say, I try to run small experiments to kind of like to scale them up first, something small in an area, and then see if it can be scaled up across the organization, rather than saying this is going to solve that initial problem. Because another point I'm sure we're going to touch on is like, it really also requires leadership buy-in. Like without leadership buy-in, you can have the best interventions, the best programs, and they will be a bit like a lead balloon. Because people follow what leaders say and what they do because they're role models, because we all aspire to move up in our careers. Most people do anyway. So if they walk the walk and talk the talk, then we'll do it. If they don't, then it tends to like fall apart very quickly.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to carry on along that line or add anything to that before I jump into the kind of next area I'd highlighted?
I think I just wanted to like concur with everything that guys said. I think getting the information from as many sources as possible is a brilliant way to kind of build your methodology of what you're going to do next. So it could be your representation, your actual physical data. It could be how people are talking about diversity and inclusion and belonging and non-discrimination. It can be listening groups, focus groups, surveys within communities. So they've really got something like evidence-based to lean into when people are saying, why is this the thing you're going after? And the other thing is just to be confident and deliberate about why you're going after a particular thing. Like Christine mentioned about Black representation, that's something that we're doing at Monzo, and it's okay to be looking at a particular group because there is an acute need here and now, and getting everybody comfortable with the fact that we of course are thinking about everybody, because a lot of things we do end up including everyone, like Jai said, but also just owning it and knowing that this is the thing that you are leaning into right now, and here's the evidence as to why we are doing that, and how that evidence marries with our company-wide goals to be more inclusive and innovative and all that kind of stuff.
That makes so much sense, and I love the approach that Jay was talking about in terms of running these little experiments and stuff like that as well. Get the information, and then act on it. And by the sound of it, sometimes manage upwards to get the buy-in as well. Okay, cool. I think roughly speaking, to give everyone a heads up, roughly what we've got planned. I think next area to dive into, and we could talk about one of these areas all for the whole hour, but I'm going to try and keep things moving. Inclusive recruitment practices. So keen to get some pointers around job ads, job descriptions, perhaps implementing blind recruitment processes, mitigating bias, and a bit of training. We'll then jump into some more on data. So I'm pleased that's come up already, and we'll delve into the data before touching on creating sort of inclusive spaces and stuff like that. I think first and foremost, in terms of the inclusive recruitment practices, it probably makes sense to start with the first point of contact, perhaps, that a lot of people have when they enter recruitment processes with a company, and that's going to be job ads, or it's going to be job descriptions, it's going to be comms that are sent out. So I was wondering whether any of you could share some examples of language or strategies that have been particularly effective for you in creating inclusive job adverts and inclusive job descriptions. And I've seen, Annie, I've seen you click the button. And the other thing I'm going to say just before you start, Annie, I've seen a few clapping emojis, a few hearts coming up and stuff like that. Thank you so much at home for kind of acknowledging the value of the points and stuff like that. And don't be shy about the chat. The techies love the chat. They're in there. They're telling me where they live and all that stuff. But everyone in the talent world is clearly keeping their cards close to their chest. But say hello. Come on, I'll give you a shout out. But yeah, sorry, Annie, I'll come to you. Some tips around language and strategies around job ads, please.
I think this is just a really small example, but where we've seen a lot of success and lots of like very positive feedback from candidates is we just made the kind of, it sounds really silly, but we made the proactive decision to move our DEI statement on our job ads to the very top of our job ads, I think a few years ago. It's a small thing, but I think it just sort of really showcases that you as a business do very much care about DEI and that you're very aware that people come from different backgrounds and the importance that you place on it as well. So little pointer there, but I think, yeah, I just wanted to add that. I think that's something that we found candidates, particularly from less well-represented backgrounds, have really found that very attractive as a business, definitely.
Front and center. Hey, this is what we're all about. So yeah, hammer it home. Does anyone else have any other tips or things to add in terms of sort of inclusive language when advertising?
Yeah, I can add to that as well. And I think this speaks to those who work in a very technical role, like, software engineering and whatnot. I think studies have definitely shown women tend to apply for roles if they're like 60% a match for the role versus, 100% match versus, others who might apply with their 60% match for the role. So I think if you're in a really heavily technical role, and we find in job descriptions, it's just like a long checklist of technical JavaScript and all the kind of different tech stacks. So yeah, just really keeping an eye out on what are your must-haves and nice-to-haves. And I think the reality is a lot of hard skills can be learned along the way. And a lot of frameworks and technologies change on a year. So what are you really looking for, and where can you compromise on? So keeping an eye out on the tech stack on your job descriptions.
Amazing. I absolutely love that tip, because I've definitely seen some job descriptions where you're like, really? We've all seen them. There's 20 bullet points. So I guess just carrying on from that, actually, Christine, I guess if you're working in the industry, you're in-house in talent and you're dealing with very technical people and they've given you this job description, we must absolutely have all these bullet points. And I guess that might well be a difficult conversation for you as the recruiter. Why it's important. It's going to put off a lot of people from applying. Have you got any tips for have you had to have that conversation? Have you got any tips for how to manage that? Yeah,
I think usually, when I would do a LinkedIn search, and I would just show them like, this is the amount of people who's got the 100% with all the keywords. And in our space, it's very, very rare. I think I ran one recently. There was only like 10 people globally, and we need people to work for us here in London. So yeah, I think there was like 0 candidates in the UK. So I think what we try to do, and I always just try to like post it for a week and actually just do a trial run. I think as Jay mentioned, running little experiments, but the candidates we get in a week are clearly not relevant. So after 1 week, I would sit down with the hiring manager and say, like, look, we got to tweak the ad here because we're not getting anyone. Even if we to do an outbound search, there's no one there. So what can we compromise on? So I think it's just a lot of doing it and teaching them and seeing how the market reacts to the ad as well, and sitting down with the managers. Because I think it's trickier if you're kicking off the search and you don't really have a relationship with them, and without the data, without showing them the candidates, yeah, they're just quite keen to say, well, there is a unicorn out there, I've worked with them before.
That word, man, it always comes back to that, doesn't it? Unicorn. Amazing. Is there any other tips around job ads, job descriptions, how we use language?
Yeah, there's lots of tools out there that can help us understand, like actually screen the text to understand if it's gendered in any way, or we're using language that isn't inclusive, or we're using language that implies that the role requires somebody who is like an extrovert and, you know, that type of, you know, ready to go, high impact. And we all want people who are ready to go and make an impact, but that kind of language implies a certain type of characteristic or personality where people can make impact and be introverted at the same time. So that using tools to scan the actual text and just kind of pare down, don't pare down the energy of it, but just kind of pare down that kind of, you know, almost like masculinity of it in a way.
Amazing. Yeah, again, makes lots and lots of sense. I think I was keen, unless, have you got anything to jump in there with, Jay, anything to add on that one?
Just a very small point is that just think about the length of the job spec as well. There's loads of research about this, about the length of job specs. And a lot of the time, it's like you said, people have all these bullet points and they have all this thick text at the top, then they have all this other stuff. And I think we have to also think about, like, you know, how are we being neuro-inclusive? Like, because also people are absorbing information in different ways. Do you need to have more visuals as well? Do you need to present the job spec in two ways? Like, are there two ways that you have a job spec in your organization? One is maybe very text heavy. Maybe there's an infographic version you want to use or something to really think about how that might appeal to other folks. Actually, that's something I would think about.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jay. We've had a couple of questions come in. It's nice to know people are out there. They are. Ben, lovely to see you, man. Hope you're doing well. I'll come to Ben's question now, actually, because it fits very nicely. Perfect timing. Vicky, again, great question, but I'm going to build this in a little bit later on in the event. But you were talking, Kirsten, about you know, tools in terms of working with JDs. Is there any tools that you would recommend off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think the one that we've used before is called Gender AI, but I think tools have evolved significantly since then. I also think that, you know, with like ChatGPT and all those types of AI tools as well, like there's a good tool that we use internally called Alchemist, as an example, is like a internal ChatGPT type tool as well. And there's like scanning and screening functions and things like that. So I don't think it needs to be necessarily off the shelf. There's so much functionality in kind of more broader tools that are out there now, even just evolved in the last few weeks and months.
Amazing. Thank you for the question, Ben, and obviously thank you for the answer, Kirsten. I'm Gemini all the way, Jay, by the way. I don't even know what ChatGPT is. I'm never heard of it. Cool. Talking about sort of keeping this conversation going further, you know, keeping it about recruitment specific for the time being. In terms of blind recruitment processes to mitigate bias, does anyone have any experience in this? Any thoughts on it in general? Tips? You know, what should be people thinking about from this to take some of that bias out of the recruitment process?
Yeah, I have a knife-edged opinion on this, because I think that I can understand why, and I can understand through the data, like how people from certain backgrounds tend to be excluded from roles because of their names. But I also think that what happens in processes, because just for context, I think my job is basically to think like about equity in all processes, all systems, everywhere. I think that you just end up just like developing like newfound biases and shocks in processes at later points, because have you educated people around the biases while you're having to remove the names? What are the implications for those communities, etc.? There's a lot of things you have to do around that. And my concern with it is that basically you're just moving the bias elsewhere. You're not pulling it out. You're just moving it somewhere or compounding it elsewhere in the process. Because the reality is, like, does that flow through to the fact that you're going to end up with like more underrepresented groups hired? Or is it just more like you have more underrepresented groups in the pipeline? And I think I always think about there's a pipeline, but you also want to convert people to hired. And so I think that's something that I'm always a little bit like, I'm not sure if the evidence is really there in terms of the outputs for organizations. For some industries, like, you know, where it came from, which was around from like music, right? Like they were doing, that's where it came from, music. Like they were doing it around orchestras and like people walking on stage and so the curtains. That's where it originally came from, this kind of concept. But I think within a traditional like recruitment situation, I think you should scrutinize the reasons why and like really think about like if you think the bias isn't moving somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. So your approach would definitely be around training and getting to the root cause of unconscious bias rather than trying to hide information or take it out. Does anyone else have a follow on from that from Jay, or is it best to keep going?
I would just say that I think the training is really, really important to bring the bias to the fore, like having all your hiring managers understand all the pitfalls that are through that process, and the recruiters as well, because as normal humans, I don't think you realize what your biases is until you actually dig deep into them. So I think bringing that out in the training and understanding the impact that can have. Everybody can be swayed by somebody they got on with, like you resonate and you gel with, and you can imagine like going for a coffee with. That can really blind people to what you're really looking for. So I think training is really important.
Kirsten, you're a pro. You've teed me up perfectly here. This is where we're going. It's almost like we've practiced this. Yeah, in terms of training hiring managers, I imagine the people out there watching along, they work in recruitment, they work in talent, they work in HR. This is what we're doing. They will be dealing with different hiring managers, and I think it's on them to coach and to train. So when it comes to training hiring managers and recruiters on inclusive interview techniques, like where do we start? What are the tips for talking to a technical manager? They're looking at CVs, they keep picking people out that look exactly like them. What do we need to do? This is where I pick on someone. I would never pick on anyone. Does anyone have a thought on where to start with training hiring managers?
Yeah, I'm happy to go, David. So the way
Thanks,
that we
Kirsten.
do it, the way we do it at Monzo is basically if you're interviewing, if you're an interviewer, you have to go through interview training before you can interview and be part of that process. What we decided to do is rather than having diversity inclusion training for hiring managers, is all weaved into the actual interview training. Because quite often, just being really, really good at interviewing and getting your techniques right, being an effective decision maker, looking at evidence, filling in your scorecards really effectively with evidence and not just assumptions and feelings, all of that helps eliminate bias. And then so you teach people how to be amazing interviewers regardless of diversity inclusion. And then on top of that, you layer in highlights about bias, understanding people different communication styles, giving people questions in advance if they're neurodivergent, and just holding yourself to account every time you're making an assumption or a decision. So I think it's about excellent interview techniques and then understanding your biases. That's the way I would kind of make the training happen, and people have to have the training before they ever do anything around recruitment.
Amazing. Thanks, Kirsten. I guess in terms of that, like no stress if not off the top of your head, we can follow up with afterwards. But I love like reading in these areas, different blogs or textbooks or whatever it may be. Have you got any references that you might recommend, or we can always follow up afterwards? I appreciate I've definitely put you on the spot with that one.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so you mean like references as in content for that?
Exactly,
yeah. We've kind of built the training based on all of the experiences that we've had, but where it's really useful to lean into is where people are experts around accessibility. So I'm happy to share the links around that. Like if you think about the government's access to work scheme, there's we want more people to be coming into the workplace. So there's lots of really useful stuff on the government website about how to make your processes more accessible for people. So that's a good place to start. But I'm happy to share the content of the training that we have, just
Yeah.
going
That'd be
through all the headings.
amazing. Yeah,
More than
definitely.
happy to.
We'll follow up, and I think our aim after this is obviously we know who's watching along, so we'll pull it together perhaps into follow-up blog piece and links and all that sort of stuff. So really appreciate that. I'm going to kick on into diversity metrics and stuff like that, unless anyone has got anything else they'd like to just quickly add in terms of the training side of things. Perfect. Oh, go on.
Really quickly, but we do very similar to Kirsten. We do interviewer training generally for anyone that's about to interview, and there's a very brief slide on DEI and your watching out for your biases, and there's a really interesting cognitive bias codex that Wikipedia have that shows all the different types of bias that we all inherently have, and it's just super interesting because I think it just really brings to the fore like how biased we all are probably as well, and it's a thing that we have to struggle with. And we don't do this at Clio, but I know I was speaking to another TA partner at the company. They were, when people were writing their scorecards, they actually noted any kind of biases that they may have had during the interview, like from the candidate CV and things like that. So being really upfront, and also making sure that hiring managers at kind of hiring wash-ups or huddles at the end of a process, if they think someone's been biased by something in the process, don't be afraid to call that out and highlight it and challenge people if you think that they are basing their decision on things that aren't related to the job description and the role that you're hiring for. Amazing.
Thank you so much. And I'm pleased to say the chat has started. It took us a while, but we've warmed them up. And Chris Piercy, great to see you with us. He's recommended a book called Growth by Toby Milden. So again, anything that goes into the chat, we'll pull it all together and we'll share it afterwards. It's cool to have this as a resource. Amazing stuff. In terms of diversity metrics, accountability, I'll maybe come to Christine first and then to you, Jay. I guess just kicking off the conversation, setting and tracking diversity goals in recruitment, practical steps people can take, what's realistic, what's valuable, basically. So yeah, could you perhaps kick things off there, please, Christine?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, so the reason why I joined FT earlier, because our CPIO then said we want to create a gender parity organization, 50-50 exactly by 2022. So that was like 3 years in. So I think what we learned in the journey is, firstly, where did the number come from? It's a nice lofty goal, but when you take a few steps back, I think as everyone mentioned today, where does the organization actually stand right now? So it took us about a year to even collate what our employee data looked like, because there's a lot of, we didn't have that information on hand, so we didn't even know what our current stats look like, firstly, and then secondly is understanding the market, the demographics of the workforce. So the tech team encompassed London, Bulgaria, and Philippines, and Manila and Philippines. And we needed to understand what does a local market and region even looks like. So if we're mandating 50-50 in Bulgaria and 50-50 in Manila, but actually there is no talent pool there, where are we getting the numbers from? So actually taking a step back and looking at all the data from like Statista, honeypot.io. There's a lot of metrics out there where we were able to really then look at it accurately. So actually what we found, in Bulgaria, the women in tech numbers was like 28%. So, we had to then allocate the numbers accordingly to the local regions to then actually set a recruitment strategy. So I think that's the first step. Now, over time, so when I left after 3 years, we actually went from 22% to 32%. So whereas we didn't quite reach the 50%, I think overall as an organization, we all agreed, we're doing the right steps. We were trying to do all the right initiatives. There was a lot of debate as well internally, I think, with having metrics. Does it kind of deter us hiring, the best people? So there's a lot of debate internally, having metrics brought up as well. But yeah, as I mentioned, I think it's all about the language and the wordings. Like, we're striving to create a more diverse organization. So I think in hindsight, having metrics in place did help the internal team, but maybe not something we wanted to shout about externally. Just because, if you don't reach it, what happens then? And I'm keen to also hear from the other panelists as well. Like, if you've got metrics in place, how would you deal with it? But yeah, I think that's some of the lessons we've learned along the way.
think the one that I really like there is setting realistic goals. You know, it sounds great, doesn't it? We're going to be 50-50. And it's like, well, it's kind of a, you know, part of me wants to go, well, where's it come from? It sounds obvious, but equally it's digging into the details a bit more. I think as promised, I'll come to you next, Jay, and then we'll fire to Annie and Kirsten if they have anything to add from there.
Yeah, something I think about, I'm going to take a little bit left-handed with the data thing, because I think something probably people all know if you ever work in like recruitment or the talent space is also around what I say is like the disclosure gap of like diversity data in the pipeline. It's like, how do you get people to actually give you that data in the pipeline for you to actually make reasonable assessments or statistical guesses around what the likelihood of the outcomes are going to be. I've seen this a lot where organizations will be like, okay, we want to get all this data, we want to start collecting it. And they want to collect it on maybe during the hiring process or in the organization, but they need to like, develop a whole overall strategy around like governance around data. Like, what does that actually mean? What do you do with that? And I think for me, when I'm just talking about the pipeline, it's like the pipeline, there's loads of data that tells you about like pipeline conversions to outcomes. But I think you have to really get to a point where you think about the candidate experience to build trust, to enable people to give you that data to them. Because the thing with pipeline data is that like, people are somewhat vested in giving that data, but somewhat not, because they may not get the job. Like, I work here, so I will give my data to this organization because I think they will do good stuff with it, and it'll be used for like tracking stuff. But as a candidate, you're just probably a bit more like, doesn't really matter, does it really? Like, if I don't really get the job, like, why am I trying to help them in that way? So I think it's like trust building in the pipeline with candidates to help them give you over that information to get there, and then really digging into, like you said, like Christine's right, like the local talent pools and those markets to be realistic about what the goals that you're actually setting. And I think setting also for the pipeline as well. And one other thing I'll say is, I think with the data pitfalls, I think in organizations is they sometimes don't question how individuals have networks, and individuals' networks tend to be homogenous, and then individuals give you referrals, and then those networks span and span and span. And so you start to make networks are even more homogenous because it's not just you now, it's someone else. So really thinking about how do you like diversify networks to basically get these people into the pipeline, because that is a data thing as well. There's a numbers game as well with that. With networks.
That makes so much sense to me actually, Jay. But I've never thought of it. So yeah, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. I'll maybe come to you next, Kirsten, if that's okay. Talking about, I guess, transparency in diversity data. Sharing progresses and challenges. And I think maybe I'll come to you first, Kirsten. I'll maybe come to you, Annie, whether it's around diversity data, but I know Clio are super transparent about salaries and all that type of stuff as well. So I'll come to you afterwards to see how that's impacted for you. But yeah, Kirsten, it'd be love to hear a bit more about transparency in diversity data, please.
Yeah, so I've been at Monzo now for 3 years. Before that, I worked for Accenture, so a big professional services company. And we did have a lot of data, but we weren't hugely transparent about it. When I came to Monzo, one of the values is to default to transparency about everything, how we made decisions. So there was just a massive expectation that we would be transparent about our data. And that includes when we report on our data. So we put a D&I report out every year. We're really quite granular about our data, but all of our demographics and all of the challenges as well as the good stuff. I think what's been getting the balance right, because obviously you're dealing with people's special category data, and so you've got obligations from a data privacy point of view. You've got to build trust. You've got to demonstrate why and how you're using the data. So we've been really clear about what the data is for and what it's not for. So it's for building our strategy and giving us direction and monitoring our progress against our goals. It's not for creating, like, for example, finding all the people in the Black community in Monzo and sending them emails to invite them to come to events and things like that. That's not what it's there for. So we've got about 85% of people in Monzo have shared their diversity data. So that's quite high. And I think that's come from building trust and demonstrating how you use it, and where you draw a line on transparency. So having rules around, you're going to share data at an aggregate level. You're not going to below certain subsets where things get identifiable, and just really being really wedded to those principles. We've got data sharing principles, what we do and what we don't do, what we use the data for, what we don't use it for, so that we can be really transparent, both externally and internally. I'm all for being transparent, but sometimes the data can be misconstrued by people who don't understand the contextual nature of the data. So we deliberately are very clear about, we're not going to share that at this level because it's so contextual that we don't want to share this, but we are sharing this other type of data, if that makes sense. So just transparent about what we're sharing and what we're not.
Yeah.
And
Makes
how
a
we
lot of
analyze it.
sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thanks very much, Kirsten.
Mm-hmm.
I will come to you next, Annie, either around sort of transparency and diversity data, or slightly change tack a little bit. I know it's not 100% D&I, but yeah, how have you found being transparent at Clio?
Yeah, I think as you called out, I think we were probably one of the early adopters in London around being super transparent on our career frameworks, outsourcing them, and also our salary bandings as well. And I think that definitely helped. Lots of really strong positive feedback from candidates from underrepresented backgrounds, particularly women in tech, because I think it's well known that women do tend to, not women in general, but some women do struggle to negotiate when it comes to landing an offer at the final stage of a process. So being really transparent about what we can offer definitely helped there a bit. I think we were inspired by Monzo. Their DEI report's really great, and it's something that we've tried to do annually. But I think it all falls down to the data that you have internally as well. I think we're struggling a bit at the moment with getting I think you do have to do a really big push internally to get enough data for the data to be meaningful, because I think earlier this year it was sort of sub 50% of the team had filled in their DEI data on our HRIS system, and we've really tried to push that internally to try and get as many people to fill it in as possible. And I think that's all around educating how, like Kirsten said, how you're using the data, why we need it, and what it's important for as well. So it is a challenge, but one that's I think being transparent about and holding yourself accountable externally has been very helpful as well.
And just a quick one, Annie. One thing that really changed for us is we've actually got a task as part of our onboarding. So, like as a new person comes in, they need to fill in various things and let people know about various things. And it's just part of that task. And then we have a diversity inclusion onboarding session that I host. And then I mention it there again, explaining why we use the data and what it's for. And I give them their little link in situ. So they're like, oh, actually, I might think about that. So that changed. That really ramped up the data collection, and it keeps it going as well.
Yeah, so you're not having to nag people to do it.
Yeah, and I literally do not do anything around data pushing anymore, because it's all in there.
Amazing.
Before, Kirsten was turning up at people's desks with a stick. Give me your data. Amazing. I think very briefly, one final area I just wanted to touch on with data, and then we'll fire through some questions. We've had 4 questions come into the Q&A, so we'll definitely fire through those. Just finally on the data piece, you've obviously talked there about tracking diversity goals, diversity data. I'm wondering whether you've seen any data or metrics linked to company performance, where some of the initiatives that you've been involved in the diversity space have had a positive impact commercially or in some other way. Have any of you got any data linked to the company after D&I initiatives? There was a nod from Christine. I don't know if that was just Dave, great question, or whether Christine...
It was a really good question. But the thing is, because I've obviously since left the FT, so it's not probably, I would like to think I contributed to the work, but it's definitely the team after I've left. So another element there, as I mentioned earlier, because of the product, we're trying to focus on getting more female readership for the FT. So I know they were very focused on there was an OKR on trying to get over 130,000 engaged female readers. So it's very focused on the subscribership. And I believe they just reached that this year. So it was quite an interesting, because we started this back in 2018. So this is quite a long journey, as you can tell. But yeah, it's they were able to kind of embed that into, firstly, like advertising, looking at communities. I think there's some questions around, how do you actually target certain communities, if you wanted to hire, say, female engineers, who then in part could be a client of yours. So yeah, I think there's a really interesting kind of back and forth, but yeah, it just took them a really long time to get there. So that's one metric there for you.
That's exactly what we're all after, though, isn't it? It's baking it in to the company, and that takes time. And I think we all talk about company culture and different bits and pieces, and again, none of it's an overnight fix, is it? So that's a fantastic success story. So yeah, amazing stuff. What I'll do, I will just jump over to the Q&A. If the panelists want to read along at the same time, I'll read them out verbally. And in terms of that, when I ask the question, if anyone wants to give me a little hand up in the air or just jump in, that would be really cool. Maybe come to like one person per question, unless it really sparks something. So first question at the top there from Vicky. Thanks for the question, Vicky. What are your thoughts about skills-based hiring rather than hiring based on experience? Who would like to take Vicky's question? Come on, Jay. That was a very formal hands up. I love the way Jay's he's dropping bombs everywhere. This is my opinion, and he's like,
I don't know what's going on with me and Zoom. It's just not working out well. But no, I think I'm very into skills-based, like competency, like this kind of based hiring. But I think for most organizations, it's a real journey to get there, because they have to really understand that and to break down like what are the core fundamental requirements of the role. And I think actually it exists beyond actually hiring. It usually sits within like a talent management strategy kind of piece of work, because it starts thinking about future forecasting skills and how they exist in the organization. And when you actually, I think I've seen when done well with skills-based hiring, you sometimes realize that you can just redeploy people internally. Like, because you actually realize that the skills exist within other teams, or there are other people within your org that you can just move across. So when done well, it like unlocks tons of mobility within the organization and opportunity as well. But it's a long journey to get there, but I think it's definitely incredibly useful. And I think it's really strategic. Like, I think it's very, very strategic overall.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jay. I'll keep firing through the questions. Anyone else just jump in, otherwise I'm just going to keep firing through. But thank you for the question, Vicky. That was awesome. Rosie Worthington, how are you, Rosie? I absolutely love Rosie. She's awesome. I hope baby Jude is doing very well. I imagine Jude's with you right now, watching along as we're doing this. But Rosie's question is anyone aware of any job boards, forums, or channels specifically designed for diverse hiring? I'll maybe add to that, has anyone had real success in terms of unlocking diverse pools of talent? Is there any tips from anyone on that?
I'm happy to take that one.
Thanks, Kirsten.
I think so. We've engaged with organisations around job boards. So, for example, we partner with Coding Black Females, and one of the things that what we actually do with them is let our engineers mentor their engineers. But part of the partnership was to have a job board. We didn't find huge success with job boards, like, specific diversity job boards. Where we've had more success is more around like active sourcing, where you're connecting with bigger networks and not relying on people to apply to roles on LinkedIn, because that can sometimes lead to that homogenous nature of your applicant pool. So I would say active sourcing has been more productive than actually having job boards. Quite a lot of people from underrepresented groups don't necessarily go on to diversity specific job boards, if you know what I mean. So it's almost like you need to think about it a bit differently. That's our perspective, but it'll be different for different industries and organizations.
Yeah, I think I might run a whole other webinar about job boards are dead, but maybe not. They've been dying for 15 years, but they still all do work at times, don't they? So amazing. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Question there from Reese. Some great initiatives in tech such as Code First Girls that will improve diversity over time, but as they are recent, we find challenges in introducing diverse talent pools at higher levels. So they struggle for diversity at more senior levels. And do you find that hiring managers are open to hiring a position at more junior level to support diversity and inclusion initiatives? So has anyone done that or had experience of that, where you've been able to say, actually, okay, we're going to hire and train or hire and grow someone to support diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I can take this one. So yes, definitely. I think at the FT we partnered up with quite a few companies, like Makers Academy was one of them, Code First Girls. We did a lot of like code bar type meetups as well. So we definitely did a lot of spray and pray model in the first year. Yes, I think it really depends on the team, right? Because ultimately, don't forget, the team still has, you know, their product roadmap, and it depends on whether they've got capacity to train. I think the last thing you want to do is actually have a lot of juniors where they're going to come in and all they're going to be doing is just, you know, self-learning, right? It's really important they're able to sit next to other members in the team and shadow and, you know, pair program and whatnot. So yeah, firstly, ensuring you've got the right training in place. And then once you have that, making sure that you're partnering up with the right boot camps. So yeah, we've worked with Makers Academy quite exclusively for like 5 years, and everyone they've brought in have eventually gone on and actually went from like junior to senior within 2 years. So yeah, finding the right partners to work with is also really, really instrumental.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time a little bit. This has gone quickly. So we've got 4 minutes and I'm going to keep it to the hour. So we'll fire through these 2 quick questions and then I'm going to come to each of you for one tip. And I might have to just get you all come back because I've got about 6 more pages of notes. Yeah, question from Naveen. I'll summarize it a little bit. But Naveen's question is, how do you make sure that your suppliers are aligned with your values and practices? So you do all that great work internally and then you work with other partners. How do you make sure that they, you know, they align with you? Has anyone got any experience in that area?
I think really, really quickly, in your request, in your RFP from suppliers, you have a diversity inclusion section so that you understand what their strategy is, what they're doing around diversity inclusion, and ask for their data if they've got it. So it's part of the decision making about whether they're going to be a supplier or not.
Amazing. Thank you very much. You've saved me a couple of times today, Kirsten. I love that. I thought there was going to be a moment of silence and you jumped in. So amazing. Question from Carly. It's for you, Annie. Annie, I love that you make your salary bandings fully transparent externally, and I've admired this from Clio for some time. Just out of interest, have you seen any effect on where candidates position themselves in these bandings since making them external? Have you been able to measure the positive effect of having done this from a diversity lens?
I think I was personally quite nervous as a TA partner with this whole process. I was worried that people would be asking for top of banding consistently, but I think if you have really well structured interview processes and you can go to the candidate and explain how you landed on the offer that you did and within the banding, and give them feedback as to where their growth areas are, and be really transparent about that as well. It's been less of an issue. I thought it probably would be a bit of a blocker and that everyone would be asking for top of banding, but it's surprisingly not been a problem for us. For us, I think we've definitely seen some big wins in women and non-binary representation in our tech team, in particular, with the transparency. I think we managed, I think in 2023, to hire like 45% of our hires were women and non-binary candidates. So really big wins there. I think not only have we really focused on hiring leadership roles in tech as well, alongside IC and junior hiring, because I think it's all well and good having lots of junior hires that come in from women and non-binary backgrounds, but then if there are no engineering managers or director of engineering candidates or like people internally, that can be a bit of a blocker. So we really focused on bringing in some candidates from that type of background into leadership on tech. Amazing. And that also helped alongside the transparency on salaries.
Amazing. Thanks, Annie. Right, I'm definitely gonna force everyone into the chat now super quickly. If you've taken anything away from today, one thing, I would like a little thank you in the chat. Let the speakers know that there are people out there that have benefited from it. So little clapping emoji, even. It doesn't have to be even words. Just send us an emoji. So there's clapping emojis coming already. We love it. Okay, I guess just to wrap things up, I think the final question, I will come to each of the panelists in turn. It'd be nice, I think, just to leave with one tip or takeaway for someone working on diversity. So I'll maybe come to Kirsten first, because you've saved me, and then we'll fire around everyone from there. So Kirsten, what's your one tip, please? Oh, I think we've got you on mute, Kirsten. Had to happen, didn't it?
Oh my God,
me.
that is such a lockdown thing to do. Yeah, I think listening to the communities and getting your data together to understand what problem you're trying to solve, because diversity inclusion is massive. So you need to find what are the key things that you're going after, or it can just, you don't make any impact, you're just trying to do lots of different things.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And before we go to everyone else, Sophie, really interesting and helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie, for being part of it. Chris Piercy, thanks, everyone. This has been great. Ben, thanks, David Data Riders too. Look forward to the next session. Graham, Natalie, Parsa. The list is building. Candice, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in and letting us know that you've enjoyed it. I'll maybe come to you next, Christine, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think I alluded to this at the beginning, but you know, if you're working in D&I, especially in recruitment, it's a collaborative effort. Don't feel like it's all just on you. It's across the team, it's across leadership. And especially when it comes to recruitment, you know, thinking about the candidate's perspective, why should they leave their current company to join you if they're comfortable where they are? So really kind of work hand in hand with your hiring teams, you know, consider things like a signing on bonus. You know, I've been in positions where we've lowballed that candidate. So yeah, making sure your comms are aligned with the team and with management, and yeah, all work collaboratively together to, you know, to bring the person in, so it's not just a one-person job.
Amazing. Thanks, Christine. I'll come to you, Annie, because I think someone's trying to get into your meeting room. So what's your one tip? And same with Jay. Oh God, quick.
A quick one. We built like a TA team DEI charter, like a mission statement, what we like, why we care about DEI, and then some like clear SLAs, like what we expect our talent partners to commit to as part of our commitment to DEI, whether that's like having diverse interview panels, offering people kind of exceptional, like reasonable adjustments as part of their interview processes, and just a few like SLAs that we've agreed to as a TA team, and that's really helped along the way. And it also helps internally sharing that with everyone as a team, that we care about it and this is what we're doing, and being really clear on that.
Amazing. Thank you, Annie. Jay, if you need to walk whilst giving us your
I'm
tip,
going to say it really fast. I wrote
go.
in the chat as well. I said, follow the data and like understand the organization's strategic goals and like kind of blend them together to kind of build a convincing narrative for like how to drive the change that you want to see in your business.
Amazing. We'll draw it to a close. Thank you all so much. If you have to drop off, Jay. It's all good. But yeah, thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us at home. We've got a whole year of events planned. I'm definitely going to say thank you, obviously, Kirsten, Christine, Annie, Jay. Really appreciate you giving up your time. It's not just your time today. I know you've helped, you know, join practice sessions. You've helped pull together the format, all that type of stuff. So massively appreciate it. How have you found it? Has it been hopefully rewarding for you as well?
Yeah, definitely been taking notes.
I've really enjoyed it, and I've had lots of great information and ideas as well to add to the ones I've got already.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.